Alright, this is a short tutorial on how to do my zip tie method for posting. I'm going to make this as short and sweet as possible. Going to edit down a good bit. But yeah, here we go. First thing you'll need is some zip ties. I use a 400-pound test zip tie, and then I just kind of cut them down to length here. Pro tip, get them right nice and straight. You just got to throw them in boiling water, boil them for a little bit, and I press them down. They stay pretty flat. But yeah, I try to get them as straight as possible. All right, we're back. A couple things you'll need. I just use a cotton pad, square for me, that I typically like. A pair of scissors, cut it down. And then I use just some good sports tape. This is Hampton. And then I have a more rigid tape that I use for the actual tape on the outside. And once we're all said and done, I'll kind of show you guys what that looks like. All right, to start, take my square cotton pad. I do about maybe 3/4 of an inch to an inch. Just cut it straight across. Do the same thing for the other post. All right, now for the first one, I typically go for the straighter edge. I'm gonna take it right on the inside of this cotton pad. I don't know if you can kind of see that, where it's inside the cotton pad. Once I do that, I just wrap it around until it looks a little something like that. Take a little bit of my sports tape here. And then I just secure that nice and evenly. All right. You want it to look a little something like that. And then, with a little bit wider section of the tape. What are you doing, Nova? A little wider section of tape. I'm gonna just take that, and I am going to go over and around. Doesn't necessarily have to be even, but you just want that pad covered. Take that down nicely. Cover this one. Girls. All right, now that it's like this, I'm gonna take another one and go around the outside just to get rid of any of those hard bumps or hard edges. Try to make it as comfortable as I can for them, as this is what's going in the ear. Girls. Sorry, I have a couple crackheads in the back. All right. Now that we got this like this, now we can go for the actual outside of the post here. All right, I'm gonna try to adjust this so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. There we are. All right, so this is my more rigid tape that I have. And then here is my post. Cotton end is gonna go just on the outside of this tape here, and I'll let you guys get a better view. Press it down across. So looks a little something like that once it's all done. So the part that goes down in the ear here, not quite on this rigid tape, but it's covering the rest of the post here. All right, and then I'm just gonna take my pair of scissors. I'm gonna cut just above it. I'm going to do the exact same thing, make another piece that is the exact same size as the other one. I mean, it doesn't have to be exact, but close. Sorry, this is really thick tape and my scissors aren't the best. All right, so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to take this other piece, sticky side down, this side is sticky side up. And then I'm going to place it directly over the top of both the zip tie and the other piece. Give it a good press down. And then you want to make sure you really kind of pinch the side of that zip tie. That way you get all those edges in there. And then you'll see you have a flat side of tape and then you'll see that you have the side with the zip tie poking up. That flat side is typically what I do on the inside of the ear. That is what I'm going to glue to the inside of the ear. All right, and then once we have this made, I'm going to make one exactly like it. One thing I did forget to mention is I typically take the end that I'm going to put down inside the ear. I typically take a pair of scissors, and I like to round off just a little bit. That way it's not just two sharp edges down in there. I know we're putting a pad to cover it, but I like to make it a little more rounded. Doesn't have to be perfect, but I don't want it to be sharp, so I just take a pair of scissors and trim that off a little bit. A little something like that. Not gonna be perfect, but as long as it's not sharp. There is a little tiny sharp edge here I'm gonna trim off. That's better, something like that. All right, and here we are towards the end of our second post. If you end up with something a little bit like this, where it's had little flappy ends here, real simple to take care of. I just take my sports tape again, and then I take that small end that I have on here, and then I just tape it around that, tape everything in, just run around once or twice till it's nice and smooth, and you end up with something like that. Boom. All right, and then we're gonna make it look just like this one. All right, now that we have both our posts here, just the same, what I tend to do is I'll take a pair of scissors, and right here at the end, right here, I tend to taper those down a good bit, so I just come in at an angle, cut towards the base there, snip that off, and I'll do the same thing. Just like that, because that is what's going to go down in the ear, and where that ear tends to get thinner, I just want to make that a little tapered. So I will do that to both posts here. Nice and easy. Doesn't have to be perfect. None of this has to be perfect. And I will taper that down. All right. Boom, just like that. You got two posts, taper down at the edge. Looks just like this. And then next step, I tend to use a paper, not a paper towel, but a paper plate. I'll show you why in just 1 second. All right, so the next thing we're gonna need is our Torbot glue. I should have gone over the supplies we need at the beginning of this video, but not perfect. You'll need Torbot glue. I use a stiffer tape. This just happens to be something called goat tape. It's very sticky, a little thicker. It's a little more rigid. And then, like I said, your sports tape, I use Hampton. And then your zip ties. On the back end, removing stuff. Once the posts are all done, you'll need some Unisolve. That is a skin-safe solvent, adhesive remover. I use the pads. Kind of a pain in the butt. Some people use the liquid and with like a Q-tip. That works just fine too. But for the posts, again, like I said, using your flat side, not your zip tie side where you can see the zip tie, the nice flat side, and then your Torbot glue here. All right, mine's getting a little low here, but I take that Torbot glue, and what you're going to do is you are going to coat the entire post. This is what's going to go on the inside of the ear. This is what's going to adhere it to the ear. This is what's saving you and your pup from having to fight through taping the entire ear. This is, for me at least, much easier because most of the work is really just building the actual posts. It is very minimal actually holding the pup down or getting them to sit still, which we all know is a pain in the butt. So I will coat this entire post, except for the part that goes in the ear. You want to leave that alone. Show you what it looks like, something like this. You will coat one post, and then coat the other post. Give the first one a little time to dry. You want, I'd say minimum 2 coats. I tend to go 3. at least on the post. Get that nice and covered. I try not to put an excessive amount on here. I am being generous with it, but not super generous. You don't want anything too pulled up, because when it does dry, it gets a little lumpy. Not a huge deal, but I just find it a little easier to remove when taking it off if there's not huge clumps stuck on that ear, because taking this off can be kind of a pain in the butt if it does bunch up like that. All right, this one is fully coated. Smooth it out. Again, I'll show you what that looks like here. Boom. I'm gonna stripe down the middle, I'll take care of that. All right, boom. All right, by the time that's done, first side should be dry again. I'm gonna do, like I said, 3 coats on mine. Make sure you get all the edges. So I do all the way up the edge. That's why I use a paper plate, because it will get all over your counter or table if you're not careful. I do like to go all the way up to the edge of the tape onto the paper plate just a little bit till I make sure all my post is covered here, all the way up to the tip, because at least for me, the part that tends to come off first when these are getting a little old is the tip up by the ear, which there's ways to remedy that too. Some people put a little piece of sports tape around the very tip of the ear and around the post, and that will help keep that tip of the ear up there, because that will be the first to flop and also first to come off on your post here. So now this is nice and coated again. I will start that second post. All right. Alright, second post done. First post is dry again. Let's get that coated up. Alright, third and final coat, and then I'll get it in those pups' ears. Alright, that is all coated up. Show you kind of what they look like now. As you can see,